the greatest detective novel in history, Sherlock Holmes, A Scandal in Bohemia.
It had been months since I last saw Sherlock Holmes. Married life had pulled me into my own world, and though I often thought fondly of the strange adventures I'd shared with my brilliant friend, I rarely found myself in Baker Street anymore. My medical practice was growing, and domestic life kept me busy. But whenever something extraordinary happened in London, my thoughts inevitably drifted back to Holmes, the man who seemed to thrive on puzzles and mysteries. One evening in March of 1888, I found myself walking down Baker Street. A sense of nostalgia pushed me to climb the familiar steps of 221B. As I entered the sitting room, the air hit me with the same familiar mixture of chemicals, tobacco, and old books. There he was. Holmes lay stretched out on the couch, thin as ever, eyes half closed, surrounded by newspapers. His sharp face looked pale in the lamplight, and even at rest there was something about him that spoke of intense focus and energy stored within. "Holmes," I exclaimed warmly, "it's been too long." He opened his eyes lazily and sat up with a smile. "Ah, Watson," he said, his voice calm but carrying that unmistakable edge of delight. "I was wondering if marriage had made you forget me entirely." "Forget you?" I laughed. "Not likely. My practice keeps me occupied, and yes, life has changed, but I'll always have a moment for you." Holmes looked me over with that unnerving way of his, eyes flicking from my shoes to my sleeve to my collar. "You've been busy indeed," he said. "You've gained a little weight, I see, and your practice must be doing well. You've been out in the rain today, splashes on your trousers, and your left hand has the slight stiffness of a man holding the reins of a cab tightly. You came directly from seeing a patient." I chuckled, shaking my head. "Holmes, you never change. Still the same magician with your deductions." He smiled faintly. "Not magic, Watson, just observation." Before we could continue reminiscing, Mrs. Hudson, the landlady, came bustling in, her face showing both annoyance and curiosity. "A gentleman insists on seeing you, Mr. Holmes. He wouldn't give his name, but he says it's urgent. He's waiting downstairs." Holmes leaned back, eyes narrowing in interest. "Show him up." A moment later, heavy footsteps climbed the stairs. The door opened, and in walked a figure both impressive and strange. He was enormously tall and broad, wearing a mask that covered the top half of his face. His clothes were rich, trimmed with fur, and even the way he carried himself spoke of power and authority. Watson, that is, I myself, couldn't help but stare. It was clear that whoever this man was, he was someone of high importance. Holmes rose politely, but without surprise. He had already guessed, I think, the nature of our visitor. "You may speak freely before my friend Dr. Watson," Holmes said calmly, gesturing to me. "He is trustworthy." The masked man's voice was deep, with a faint foreign accent. "It is of the utmost importance that what I am about to tell you remains secret. The fate of a great kingdom may rest upon it." Holmes nodded. "I promise complete discretion." The man hesitated, then suddenly pulled off his mask. Beneath it was a face, handsome yet flushed with stress. He had a great blond beard and piercing blue eyes that matched his powerful build. "You are speaking to Wilhelm Gottsreich Sigmundsson von Ormstein, the King of Bohemia," he said gravely. I confess I almost leaped from my chair in surprise. Holmes, however, only inclined his head slightly, as though he had expected nothing less. Once Holmes uncovered the truth, our mysterious visitor had no choice but to reveal himself. It was none other than the King of Bohemia, and he had come with a problem that could endanger his crown. The revelation that our mysterious visitor was none other than the King of Bohemia left me stunned. I had read of him in the papers, of course, a monarch both wealthy and powerful, a man who stood at the center of European politics. Yet here he was, standing in Holmes's sitting room, confiding in us as if no court in the world could help him. Holmes remained calm, as though royal clients were a matter of routine. He gestured for the king to sit. "Please," Holmes said, "tell us what troubles you." The king lowered himself heavily into the armchair, his great frame filling the room with an almost intimidating presence. "I have come to you because I am in need of advice," he began. "Tomorrow I am to be engaged to the second daughter of the King of Scandinavia. It is a matter of the highest political importance. You understand, Holmes, that this marriage could unite two royal houses and secure alliances across Europe." Holmes nodded. "I understand. Go on." The king leaned forward, his voice dropping. "But there is a danger. Before my betrothal, I was involved with a woman I admired greatly. Her name is Irene Adler." At the mention of the name, Holmes's eyes flickered with interest. I had never heard of her, but the way the king spoke told me she was no ordinary woman. "She is an opera singer, born in New Jersey, but she has performed across Europe. Beautiful, clever, with the soul of an artist and the mind of a man. I was captivated. We were close, very close." The king's cheeks flushed beneath his beard, but he pressed on. "At that time, I was young, foolish, and wrote her letters. Nothing shameful, but still enough to ruin me if they were revealed. When our relationship ended, I believed the matter was closed. But now, with my engagement, she threatens to use these letters against me." Holmes steepled his fingers, his gaze sharp. "Threatens? How exactly?" The king's voice grew tense. "She refuses to return the letters. I have begged, bribed, and even attempted to steal them back, but she will not yield. 2 days ago, she told me directly that if my marriage is announced, she will send the letters to the family of my fiancé. The scandal would destroy everything." Holmes leaned back, considering. "You are sure the letters cannot simply be dismissed as forgeries?" The king shook his head. "No, the handwriting is mine, and she would not hesitate to swear to it. It is enough to end the alliance." Holmes's eyes glinted. "Then this is indeed a delicate matter. Tell me, sire, why should this woman, who no longer has a claim on you, hold to these letters with such determination?" "She is a woman," he said heavily, "and women are not always logical." At that, I noticed the faintest trace of a smile tug at Holmes's lips, but he made no comment. Instead, Holmes asked, "Where is Miss Adler now?" "She resides in London, in a villa at Briony Lodge, Serpentine Avenue, St. John's Wood. I have her address here." He handed Holmes a slip of paper. Holmes tucked it away. "Does she live alone?" "With a single maid only, but she is well known, admired by many. Gentlemen call upon her often. It is not easy to watch her without attracting suspicion." Holmes tapped his fingertips together. "Very well. And what exactly do you wish me to do?" "Get the letters back," the king burst out, his fist striking the arm of the chair. "It is imperative. I will pay you any sum you name. You must recover them." Holmes raised his hand calmly. "My fees are what they always are, Your Majesty. They are fixed. I work for the problem itself, not for the payment." The king leaned forward eagerly. "Then you accept?" "I accept," Holmes replied. "But first, allow me one last question. The photograph." The king started slightly. "Ah, you know already." Holmes nodded. It must be a photograph. A woman like Miss Adler would know that mere letters could be denied, but a photograph of you together would be indisputable. The king groaned. Yes, a photograph of myself and her. That is what she threatens to use. Holmes rose to his feet. Then, sire, you may rest easy. Before your marriage is announced, that photograph shall be in your hands. The king sprang up, seizing Holmes's hand with both of his. Thank you. I know you can succeed wherever all others have failed. Holmes's expression did not change, but I could see in his eyes the excitement that only the most difficult cases brought him. Good night, Your Majesty. Tomorrow we will begin. And with that, the great monarch of Bohemia departed into the foggy London night, leaving Holmes and me alone with the weight of what promised to be a fascinating adventure. The king's story left no doubt. Irene Adler held the power to bring him to ruin. Holmes listened carefully, then agreed to take the case. By the next morning, he was already at work, planning and preparing in his own quiet, methodical way. The following morning, after the king's departure, I went down to Baker Street to see Holmes. I found him deep in thought, stretched out on the couch in his usual way, pipe smoke curling around him. "Good morning, Watson," he said, without looking up. "You're just in time. Today promises to be interesting." I sat down opposite him. "What's your plan?" I asked. Holmes leaned back, fingertips together, eyes half closed. "The problem is simple. We must know where Miss Adler keeps that photograph. Once we know, taking it is a matter of opportunity." He rose, took his old disguise kit from the corner, and began laying things out. False whiskers, wigs, grease paint, odd scraps of clothing. I had seen him at this before, and even so, it never failed to amaze me how he could vanish into another man entirely. "Today I'll be someone else," he said lightly, holding up a ragged coat. "A shabby stable worker down on his luck. That way I can walk freely through the streets near her house without suspicion." By midday, Holmes was transformed. Gone was the sharp figure of my friend. In his place stood a rough-looking fellow, slouching, with dirty hands and torn boots. "My dear Holmes," I laughed, "you'd pass me on the street and I wouldn't know you." "That's the point, Watson. Keep close today. We may need to act fast." We set out together toward Briony Lodge, the elegant little villa in Serpentine Avenue where Irene Adler lived. She was, as the king had said, a singer of some fame, and her house drew plenty of attention. A smart groom waited at the door, and a small crowd often gathered when she stepped out. Holmes spent much of the day simply watching. He leaned against fences, smoked his pipe, and strolled idly, but I knew his sharp eyes missed nothing. He noted the servants, the neighbors, the way visitors came and went. I did the same, though with far less skill. Late in the afternoon, we finally saw her, Irene Adler herself. She was striking, tall, graceful, with a face that drew every eye. She wore a simple but elegant dress, and when her carriage came around, she stepped inside with the ease of someone entirely at home in the world. Beside her in the carriage sat a well-dressed gentleman, handsome and strong, with the confident air of a man sure of himself. Holmes's eyes narrowed. That is Godfrey Norton, a barrister from the Inner Temple, very close to her. They drove off quickly, leaving Holmes and me to follow on foot. To my surprise, Holmes hailed a cab almost at once. "Quick, Watson, they're heading to a church. Something is afoot." We arrived just as Irene Adler and Godfrey Norton entered St. Monica's Church. Inside, Holmes quietly slipped among the pews, while I kept back. A clergyman was hurrying about, clearly preparing for a service. Within minutes, the truth struck us. They were arranging a wedding. Indeed, it was so. Irene Adler and Godfrey Norton were to be married that very hour, in great haste. The bride radiant, the groom impatient, the clergyman flustered. There were only 2 witnesses present, and suddenly Holmes was pushed forward to sign as one of them. I could hardly contain my laughter as I watched my friend, still in his shabby disguise, solemnly scratch his name on the marriage register. When it was done, and the couple had dashed off together, Holmes rejoined me outside, his expression half wry, half annoyed. "Well, Watson," he said, "our woman is married. That complicates matters." I grinned. "And you, my dear Holmes, are officially a witness to her wedding." He gave a small shrug. "It makes little difference. Married or not, she still has the photograph, and she still may use it. The king's problem remains the same. But now we must act quickly. Tonight we strike."
That evening, as we left St. Monica's Church, Holmes was quieter than usual. The sudden marriage had changed nothing of importance. Miss Adler still held the photograph, but it added a new layer of urgency. "She will be cautious now, Watson," he told me as we rode back to Baker Street. "But tonight we'll force her hand. I know her kind, clever, quick, but predictable in certain moments. If all goes well, by tomorrow morning we'll have the photograph in our hands." I could see the gleam in his eye, that restless energy he always carried when a case reached its turning point. For my part, I was eager, though uncertain of what Holmes planned. And so it was, as night fell, that we set out once more toward Briony Lodge. That night, Holmes was in his element. He had worked out every detail of the plan and carried it out with a calmness that always amazed me. We left Baker Street together, Holmes dressed in his usual way, but as we neared Serpentine Avenue, he slipped away for a few minutes and returned so perfectly disguised I could hardly believe it was the same man. He had transformed himself into a rough, drunken stableman, his face red, his clothes shabby, and his walk unsteady. "You see, Watson," he said, with a grin that showed beneath the slur, "people notice little when they think they already know what they're seeing. To them, I'll be nothing but a poor fellow stumbling about." When we reached Briony, the street outside was full of activity. It was nearly 8 o'clock, and Miss Adler was expected to leave for her evening drive. A small crowd of loafers, coachmen, and curious idlers had gathered by the gate, waiting to catch a glimpse of her. "She is quite the popular figure," Holmes muttered to me, though he kept his eyes fixed on the house. Not hard to see why the king was smitten. At that very moment, the door opened, and Irene Adler herself stepped out, dressed for the carriage. I confess, Watson though I am, I had to agree with the king. She was striking, with a grace and confidence that made her stand out at once. Holmes elbowed me lightly. "Now, Watson, watch carefully. This is the moment." As she descended the steps, a scuffle suddenly broke out in the crowd. A pair of men, seemingly drunk, began shoving one another. In the confusion, one struck Holmes a heavy blow, sending him sprawling against the steps. A cry went up, "He's hurt! The poor fellow's hurt!" Instantly, Adler herself leaned forward. "Bring him inside," she called. "He may be injured. Help him in at once." In the rush, Holmes was carried into the sitting room of the house, groaning convincingly. I followed, heart pounding, wondering what he was playing at this time. It was then that the trick revealed itself. As Holmes lay on the couch, apparently dazed, he made a quick motion with his hand. A moment later, one of the windows was flung open, and I heard his sharp, clear cry, "Fire! Fire!" The room erupted in alarm. Servants ran, Adler herself sprang to her feet, and everyone turned in panic toward the windows and doors. In such a moment of confusion, A person's instinct is to guard their most precious possession, and Adler was no exception. I saw her glance toward the panel above the fireplace, her eyes betraying the hiding place of the photograph. "Excellent," Holmes murmured under his breath as he staggered up. "Exactly as I thought." The panic quickly died down when no smoke or flame appeared, and Adler, realizing she had been fooled, laughed lightly. Ah, it was nothing, only a false alarm. Holmes bowed low, still in character, and made his way out with the rest of the confused crowd. I followed, barely able to contain my excitement. Once we had turned the corner, Holmes straightened his back, his disguise slipping away, and his eyes shone with triumph. "Watson," he said eagerly, "we have it. Did you see her look toward the hiding place? The photograph is behind the panel over the fireplace. Our work is almost finished." I could only shake my head in admiration. "Holmes, you are extraordinary." He smiled. "Merely observant, my dear fellow. Tomorrow morning we return with the king and secure the prize." And with that, we walked back through the London night, Holmes whistling softly, utterly pleased with himself.
I was at Baker Street early the next morning, eager to see the king's problem finally come to an end. Holmes, however, seemed in no hurry. He lounged in his chair with his pipe, looking as calm as if he had nothing at all on his mind. It was close to 8 o'clock when we heard the heavy steps of our client on the stairs. The King of Bohemia entered, richly dressed, his face alight with excitement. "Well," he cried, before even sitting down, "have you got the photograph?" Holmes leaned back, half smiling. "Not yet." The king stared at him in surprise. "Not yet? Then what on earth have you been doing?" Holmes shrugged. "My work is done." "Done? Then where is the photograph?" "In safe hands," Holmes replied coolly. The king stamped his foot impatiently. "Safe hands? I don't understand. If it is safe, then why isn't it in my hands?" Holmes glanced at me with a faint smile, then said, "Because it isn't with Irene Adler anymore." The king almost shouted, "Not with her? Then where is it?" Holmes reached into his pocket, pulled out a note, and handed it across. "This was left for me at Baker Street this morning. You'll see for yourself." The king tore it open with trembling fingers and read it aloud. "My dear Mr. Sherlock Holmes, you did it wonderfully last night. Until the fire alarm rang, I had no idea it was all a trick. But then I realized your goal, and I knew you had seen where I hid the photograph. You would have taken it this morning, but I was ready for you. I left with my husband as soon as I could. Yes, I am married, since yesterday, to the man I truly love, Godfrey Norton. I don't care for the king. He may do as he pleases, but I will not let him ruin me, nor will I let myself be used as a pawn in his affairs. The photograph is gone. Do not look for it. It does not exist anymore. Rest assured, I keep one copy only for my own protection, but it is safe, and the king has nothing to fear from me. I love my husband, and he has all my loyalty. Tell the king he need not worry. I leave this letter as proof of my respect for you. You are indeed the best of men. Irene Norton, formerly Adler." When he finished, the king dropped into a chair with a great sigh. "What a woman!" he cried. "What a woman! Would she not have made an admirable queen? Is it not a pity that she was not on my level?" Holmes said nothing. The king paced the room in agitation. "Do I understand this correctly? She declares she will never harm me? She will never use the photograph?" "Precisely so," Holmes replied. "And she is gone forever with another man?" "Yes," Holmes said simply. The king's huge shoulders slumped. Relief mixed with disappointment showed on his face. "Then I am safe, truly safe?" "As safe as you could ever be, sire," Holmes told him. The king clasped Holmes's hands warmly. "I thank you, sir. You have saved me from a terrible fate. What can I give you? Tell me, anything you wish." Holmes waved him off. "Your Majesty has nothing I desire." The king pulled off a magnificent ring from his finger and tried to hand it to him. "This, at least, as a token." Again Holmes shook his head. "No, thank you. There is one thing, however, I would value more than all the jewels of Bohemia." "And that is?" asked the king. Holmes's eyes gleamed. "This photograph of Irene Adler." The king blinked in surprise, then laughed loudly. "Take it, by all means. She has outwitted me, but she cannot outwit you, Holmes." And with that, he bowed deeply and left us. When the door closed, Holmes stood silently by the fireplace, lost in thought. I couldn't help but ask, "And what do you think now, Holmes?" He smiled faintly. "I think she was the cleverest woman I have ever met. To me, she will always be the woman." And with that, Holmes slipped Irene Adler's photograph into his desk drawer, his eyes shining with admiration.